Today's text reminded me of the story of Babette's feast. Babette was a member of the house of royalty when her country was taken over by force. She was a great chef. She cooked these lavish and exquisite meals for everyone in the royal palace. And now the royal palace was under siege, and it was in ruins, and everyone who hadn't been executed had fled into exile, including Babette, who went north. She settled in a little Scandinavian village somewhere in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, on the coast. And there she became a cleaning woman and a servant for those who would feed her, give her work. The woman who once ate the most rich and exquisite foods in the world now shared a meal of fish soup and dried fish, the meager things that were available to those on the Scandinavian coast. And so it was for many, many years that Babette lived in this particular community until she became very endeared to everyone in the community, because, you see, no one was as loyal as Babette. No one worked harder than Babette. No one was more humble. And then the day came that she received word from home that the siege had been over for a number of years, and that in fact she received a very large dowry, a lottery, if you will. And so now everyone in the little town made themselves ready for Babette to leave their village, because she had become very wealthy. And so she vowed to give these people one great blessing while she could. For these people who had lived eating horrible foods, these people who had lived in such poverty, who had lived such hard lives, and she alongside them, no one knew better. So she wanted to treat them to something that they had never experienced before. Have you been to one of those banquets where you got to start on the outside and work your way in with the silver? You have to watch to see if the matron of the table eats chicken with her fingers or her fork, so you can tell which way you're allowed to do it. This was a feast of that magnitude. Babette had the finest of spices and rice imported from the Far East. She had meats imported from all over the world, lobster, quail, everything you can think of. And there she began to prepare one expensive dish after another. It was her pleasure to treat the entire village, and everyone sat and waited as course by course she lay before them a meal which she had prepared so many times before, a meal indeed fit for a king. Can you imagine? If you had never been to any kind of banquet like this, if you had never eaten anything but the same measly diet year after year, and suddenly, can you imagine? Oh, it was a night to be there, let me tell you. It was a night to remember, and the next day it was all over. And so they began the next day. You know that feeling you get the day after the Super Bowl, Sean? It's all blue, it's all over. The next day they got up and began to face the reality that now they would do life without Babette. For she had been reminded of her inheritance, she had been graced with wealth, and she had been gracious to them, and now surely she would leave them. But what they didn't know was she couldn't go anywhere, because she had spent every last dime preparing this great feast for these people who had never experienced life in this way. And so Babette lived the rest of her days in the village with the people that she had become community and family with. You see, I thought about that this week, because I've heard this text preached before, and you know how it goes. First of all, if you're not giving to the church because you're too poor, you're cheating God. I should say, if this is being recorded, that's sarcasm. But you've heard it, right? Trust God, give away your last dime and trust God. And if you're doing that, I'm cool. I'm all right with that. But I've heard it so many times that you don't have to be afraid to give it all away. Sell it all. Just like Jesus told the rich young guy, he said, give it all away. Give it to the poor, then follow Jesus. Because you've got to know that Jesus is coming back. And when Jesus comes back, the Son of Man comes like a thief, and no one knows what the hour is. You don't want to be caught unprepared. You don't want a savings account, a 401k, no retirement fund. Don't be storing away things, preparing for old age, because old age may not come, because after all, Jesus, the Son of Man, comes, bang! And if you aren't in the right place, at the right frame of mind, you could be in trouble. This is the way I've heard this text preached for so long, and if that's true, I'm in a bunch of trouble. I hope you're ready. If you're about to give away your retirement fund, and I may have to support you in those years, think about it again, will you? If you're going to give it to someone, give it to me. If you're eyeing mine, I'm fairly protective of what little there is, because I'm pretty sure my kids are not going to take care of me. What could this mean? I heard someone say that the term Son of Man, there are those who really believe that Jesus is referring to his humanness. That when over and over people want to be reminded that, is Caesar Lord or is Jesus Lord? Jesus is God. Jesus refers to himself many times. The gospel writers assign the title to him over and over as the Son of Man. Someone told me once it's as simple as knowing your humanity. Jesus understood both his divinity and his humanity. And I believe he asks us to understand the same truths about ourselves. But our humanness is perhaps the one thing that evades us more often than even our divinity. Humanness is not easy, and humanness comes to us sometimes very quickly, in very unexpected ways. Sometimes when we least expect it, an opportunity to know ourselves as God knows us are there. And if we are not prepared, if we are not watchful, if we are not waiting, we'll miss it. Now, I have to be reminded that Luke's gospel always makes heroes of the poor, the infringed, the disenfranchised. It's always a shepherd or a sick woman or a leper. There's always someone in Luke's gospel that does not stand in the place to be the hero and turns out to be the hero, a Samaritan of all people. And it's Luke's gospel that takes the opportunity to speak to wealth in a way that other gospels don't. Be reminded that in Matthew's gospel, when Jesus gives out the Sermon on the Mount and he proclaims the Beatitudes and those who are blessed, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the peacemakers, it's in Luke's gospel, speaking to a much poorer audience, speaking for a much poorer audience, edited by a much poorer audience, that Luke's gospel adds to those blessings the woes of riches. It's not that Luke Or even Jesus in Luke claims the right or the privilege to decide who goes to hell. Neither do they give all of that to those who are wealthy. It's not a way of saying that rich people have no chance. It's a way of saying that sometimes our priorities are misplaced, and there are things that stand in the way of our receiving the blessing when it comes, of our understanding our humanness or our divinity when those moments briefly appear to us. It's simply misplaced security. Where do you draw your sense of security? It is not a gospel that says you should be unprepared. It's not a message of Jesus or the gospel writer saying just give it all away, forget it all. There are other places in the gospels that are dealing with that. Read 2 Thessalonians, where people had begun to quit jobs and wait for Jesus to come back by doing nothing. And someone is feeding those people. And the writer of that letter has to get as harsh as to say, if you can't work, don't eat. Really? That's in the Bible? And some people would say that means then we should starve folks to death who refuse to be a part. That's not what it's saying. Luke's gospel takes these extreme languages. There's a place in Luke's gospel that it says, unless you hate your father, unless you hate your mother, unless you hate your children. And that is not a call to us to love any less. You see, Jesus and the gospel writers, like Paul, had before them tactics of language that were common and that were available to them, and they used them. Without saying, literally give it all away, the gospel writer is saying, it's like you don't have to be tied up in your security to your money. That it's like you could just give it all away and you'd still be just fine. Oh, that's a little different than saying you have to give it away. I remember my business partner, the day I went to him and I said, I'm going to go to the church full time and I'm not going to be here any longer. Day by day by day. I'm still invested. I still own half of the debt along with you. I will still do everything I can, but I won't be able to be here in body to work. You need to decide how we're going to do this. Do you want to buy me out? Do you want to fire me? Do you want to fold up and quit? Do you want to keep going without me? What is it you would like to see me do? He said, I'll need to think about it. He came in the next day and he said, I'm just going to keep going. Just like every day, I'm just going to keep going. And he said, I found out last night, as I prayed, that if I wanted to keep it, I had to be willing to give it away. And when I told God, you can have it, then I began to think, well, wait a minute. This is not the darkest day. There are ways that we can rise up to meet this challenge. We are not finished. But to proceed as if your life didn't hinge upon that thing, you can give it away. Listen, when your humanness presents itself, if you're tied up in what you own and how much of it you have and how much you're struggling to have some more of it, and I don't care what that is. It might be barns like we talked about last week. It might be treasure and wealth. It might be how much you know about the Bible. It might be what a great parent you are. It might be what a great son you've been. It may be how talented or good looking you are. But if that's where you're invested, when your humanness comes, you are going to have a terrible, terrible day. It's true. It's absolutely true. Richard Rohr used to say that the parent who finds their entire identity in God in giving the world 2.5 perfect children, the day they learn that one of those children has a drug habit, they have no identity left. They are flat and wasted before God and before the world. Doesn't mean we don't strive to raise good children. It doesn't mean that we don't invest ourselves in their lives, but it means that on the day that your humanness presents itself, You better know that you are a child of God. You better know that you are a beloved son and a beloved daughter of God, and that all that you do to order your steps is all you can do, and it is God who comes along and blesses you. Sometimes it's kismet, sometimes it's luck, sometimes it is right living. I don't know what you call it. But you got to admit, you do the best you can, and then there is grace. And the greater measure, my friends, is always grace. Not what I've done. Your humanness presents itself when you're the weakest, when you're caught in your lie, when your game is exposed, when everybody knows and you think, I can't face those people, but you have to go back in and you have to look them in the eye knowing that they know. And there is grace. That is your humanness. Your humanness comes when a parent leaves and you struggle to internalize that abandonment. Sometimes it takes years. Your humanness comes when the marriage falls apart. Your humanness comes when someone close to you dies, when the things happen that you cannot control. And it comes like a thief. And if you'd known it was coming, you'd have got ready. You'd have stored up. You would have been prepared, but you don't know because you thought you were doing great. How do you prepare? How do you watch? How do you wait? How do you be like the one watching for the bridegroom to come? Like the one prepared for the thief. And it is not that hard. You see, while there's this game going on that demands our security, it demands our focus, it demands our attention, our fears, everything, there is yet another game. Remember who you are? Did you catch that part a minute ago? There you are. There you are. It is in those disciplines. It is in that day-to-day practice, that reflection upon. You know what? I'm sorry, I'm going to borrow from my wife for a moment. She said, I'm done and I don't know what to do. What should I do? Should I just do nothing? And I was like, yeah, now we're there. Because when we do nothing, God can do what God does. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't plant and we don't sow and we don't pray and we don't reap the harvest. But there is a place where we soon recognize that we are struggling with our humanity. We are overemphasizing our divinity, and we are telling God how we want this thing to work out, and this is how we're going to do it, God. And God is patient. God is kind. God is never jealous, envious, or boastful. God does not demand God's own way. Ooh, I wish God would do that every once in a while, because God's way usually works out better than mine, But God, like my gracious wife, waits for me to catch up. You know what? Joseph Bill said that contemplative prayer was the one thing that could, out of all the disciplines, that could change your life more than any of the others. And I was talking to my dear friend Toby Williams about that, and I said, you know, but it's nothing. It's the practice of nothing. It's the practice of doing nothing, being nothing, thinking nothing. And Toby smiled and said, yeah, and that's what we need to be better at, and it takes practice. Like Babette, have you recognized that your real identity is in people that you love, in your community? It is in your present situation. It is in your humanity. Would you join me this fall for a little prayer, for a little study, for a little journey deeper into that which God is, into that which God beckons us, and into our deeper and true selves. May God have the glory. Will you pray with me?